Be okay, Ms. Lowry?
Absolutely.
So the one thing we wanted to either get approved tonight, I believe it's on the agenda. If not, we can get it on the next meeting. Eventually, it's going to be addressed. Is there's a nice feature underneath the law for student teachers that will allow them to substitute teach up to 20 days during their student teaching time, and no more than 10 days in one particular environment. So what we have brought forward tonight, this evening, for the board's consideration, the committee's consideration, is said agreement. In past IUP, frowned upon this, and they didn't really make this option available to their students. But we had some nice conversations over the last couple of weeks with regards to need for substitutes and the need to help make sure our schools remain open, that they have agreed for this year to allow that to occur for student teachers. So it's really a nice opportunity. And what I want to do is really just go over, the process really simple, really quickly with you. But again, if you ask me the biggest takeaway, the takeaway is it will allow us now to bring in student teachers in up to 20 days during their student teaching experience that will count, that they'll get paid for as a substitute teacher. And there's some requirements, though, because IUP and I both agreed with Rob that, look, we need to be selective in who we pick. We want to make sure they're ready to go, not only with maturity-wise, but the right competencies and approval from not only IUP, but from their cooperating teacher. So looking at A, B, and C, and D, it just goes through the process of what a student teacher would do in order to substitute teach. We would pay them $90 a day, just like we would any substitute teacher, and that would be handled through Kelly Subs Services, who we contract with. At this point, we have about 10 to 12 student teachers in our building. Now, of the 10 to 12, we're hopeful more than half will meet the requirements and are ready to substitute. But Ms. Lowry, the one thing I want to make the committee aware is we would not put these people in substitute teaching on their first week of substitute teaching. What we agreed to do is wait till after midterm. Once we feel they're both ready from IUP and from the local co-op person, then once they're approved, we would put them in the substitute teach. It seems like a simple agreement. I know I'm silly. I feel silly bringing it forward, but I wanted you to know what we're doing. So we, you know that we're doing everything we can to find qualified substitutes to help us keep our doors open for our kids. And this is one of those options that we have set forth tonight, Ms. Lowry.
So I just have a quick question. Is the student getting academic credit at the same time as they're going to get paid?
Well, yes and no. Yeah, that when they get paid, they're getting paid as a substitute teachers, but the hours will still go towards counting for their certification, meet the substitute or the student teacher requirements that they need to fulfill through IUP as well. So it works in both hands, if that makes sense, Ms. Lowry.
And the folks at IUP are aware of this and they're okay with that?
Yeah, they if you look at the process, to be honest with you, Ms. Lowry, they created the process and requirements. They just reviewed it with us, and their committee approved it today. And in fact, on Wednesday, they're going to roll this out to all IU 28 schools as an option for schools to participate in. So we were the emphasis, I think, that started this process.
Okay.
We're going to roll out to everyone. So
okay, and I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, they created the rules, Ms. Lowry. So I didn't go, excuse me, I didn't go into much detail with it.
Okay.
I looked at them and said, can I live with them or not? And at this point, I feel comfortable living with the rules that they established, Ms. Lowry.
All right, sounds good.
And what is the amount that they're going to be paid per day?
Same thing as all of our substitute teachers, Ms. Cinda, $90.
So they'll be employees of the company that we hire to get our substitutes?
Yes, Miss Cinda, for that day.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And Miss Cinda, you bring up a good point, one that I kind of skipped over. There will be some onboarding required by Kelly Services that they'll conduct and they'll require. That's really out of our hands. It makes sense what they're doing, but yes, they'll do some onboarding with them as well. So they will be employees technically for that day through Kelly Services while they're subbing up to 20 days. Yes, ma'am. Rob, is there anything else you want to add to the partnership that we worked with IUP from your perspective, or Justin?
I just want to reiterate that this is actually a state law that was passed in order to kind of relieve some of the districts from sub shortage, which everyone's experiencing under normal circumstances, which are in fact enhanced in the current situation. So it's something that has been a possibility for many years, but IUP has not supported it until just now, when we kind of pushed them on it and said, please. We are having an issue with the subs, and we need to explore every opportunity to make sure our schools can stay open. So anything you can do to help us out would be great. And they've been very gracious in and going back to their committee and making this work. So we're thankful for the work they've done.
Ms. Lowry,
Sounds great.
oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, I said it sounds great. Anybody have any other questions? All right.
Yuta, I'm certainly in favor of moving this forward. Gives us some flexibility. I assume we can pick and choose the students that are ready to handle a class on their own. But if we have a COVID problem, finding teachers on a ad hoc basis is going to be difficult for us. So this is a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, Mr. Harley, you bring up good points. They're going to be vetted through not only IUP, but through the local co-op teacher. And the one thing that I agree to, and I think it makes sense, they're going to stick within their certification. So, for example, if you're an elementary teacher, we're not going to put you at the high school teaching chemistry. We're going to do everything we can to keep you in that certification area. That way, it's still beneficial to that particular student teacher. We think putting them outside of that certification area is just, I wouldn't say cruel, but not in the best interest of the student teacher. So that's how we're going to move forward. And we think it makes sense for both parties, and we're appreciative of the leadership at IUP for working with us and rolling out now to the whole county. Moving on. Moving on, number 2. Tonight, just again, last week's meeting at Academic Committee, we informed the public that we would be bringing names forward during an exec session, talk about the candidates for the positions that were previously posted. And again, we're just going to address them tonight. So all this is another FYI to the public and to the board that we have talked about this for 2 weeks in a row. And tonight, as a result of the work we did last week, we'll address the candidates for the names and the positions that were listed and provided to the board during an exec session. During the regular session, then we can discuss what the board decides. And that's important for a point of clarification, because I think there's some confusion. During these committee meetings, we talk about the positions in general, but during executive session is when you talk about the names of the candidates, as that falls under executive session. So the board needs time to deliberate, discuss, and then at the meeting, the public meeting, then we'll have the names ready once there's been some discussion and deliberation by the board, if that makes sense, Ms. Lowry.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I really do appreciate the fact that this is coming through the committee first, and that Academic Committee has issued their support to moving forward with these extra duty, extra pay assignments for winter, and that we will make the names available at the end of the board meeting, so that we're not putting out information that may be premature.
I think you're absolutely right, Ms. Lowry. I think there's been 2 instances where information was miscommunicated, not on our end, but in the paper. And I think we have responsibility to now be aware of that and do our best to make sure we control what's being released. That way there's no confusion. And I apologize. I know that may sound somewhat draconian, but it does fall in lines with the law. It does allow us to work within our purview. But I think it's most importantly, it's being kind and respectful of the people who are candidates. That way we don't mislead anyone, if that makes sense, Ms. Lowry.
Yeah, and I think it's not any different than any other personnel decisions that are made for the district.
Agreed. Any other questions, Ms. Lowry, on number 2, or can I move on to number 3?
I don't have any questions. Anybody else have any questions, Cinda? Nope. Okay. I think we can move to 3.
Thank you, Ms. Lowry. Tonight, the board and executive session will discuss the qualified candidates for the LPN vacancy at Ben Franklin. Administration recommended. Administration has a recommendation. Mr. Cronauer can bring you up to speed here in a minute about the process, not the names. We'll review the candidates for the position in executive session, but respectfully, we're asking that the board look at hiring someone tonight, if at all possible, just due to the fact that we're without someone right now at the current time. And the nurses and the health services department in general have done an incredible job help keeping us open, well, working off out of the mindset of abundance of care, but it's allowing us to keep open. So respectfully, we'd like to talk to the board at executive session about the candidates for said position and address later tonight. Mr. Cronauer, anything you want to give the committee a general purpose about the number of candidates and the range in which we sought out qualified candidates before we move on, sir?
Yes, sir. We advertised, well, the board accepted the resignation, I believe, probably at this point about 4 weeks ago, as soon as we found out about the vacancy. So we did advertise locally in the paper. We advertised on Indeed. And I do believe we reached out to some other local areas to advertise as well. We received probably anywhere from 10 to 15 applications. We ended up interviewing 6 after a couple of people declined interviews due to different circumstances. So myself, Mr. Banny, the principal, Ben Franklin, and then the certified school nurse at Ben Franklin, Lindy Stossel, interviewed not last week, but the week before. And we reached out to 2 possible candidates after the interview. We kind of gave them some time to think about it because we knew that they possibly, one was an RN and another one had been an LPN in a doctor's office for quite some time. And we just wanted to give them some time to think about the job before they committed to it. So one of our top candidates did turn it down. And the other one did accept. So we are happy with who we are getting. She feel that she'll be a great fit for Indiana, as she has great experience in pediatrics. So this is not going to be a shock coming in to work around little kids. Any questions from the committee?
So just a point of clarification, the committee is making a recommendation as to who we should hire, and the person has preliminarily accepted, provided that that's what
Yes, she has already accepted the position.
I just wanted to make it clear for people who are watching and who are participating.
Yes, we always reach out ahead of time before we bring the name to the board, because we don't want the board to approve somebody and then turn around the next day and they decide not to accept. So,
right. I just want to make sure that all of those hires are contingent upon what happens in exec session and final decisions by the committee and the board.
Yes, and the candidates always know that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Ms. Lowry, if there's any other questions, I'll move on to the policies, but I'll defer to you if you're comfortable.
I think we can move on.
Okay, so we have a variety of updated policies. In particular, items number 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all related to one another. What happened, as you know, we went through Title IX training, and some of us are still going through it, as we have till the end of the month to complete it. But the policies have been updated to reflect the new requirements of Title IX regulations. One thing that happened is we identified who the contact person is, so families or individuals are aware of it when they look up the policy, and as well as it's an umbrella policy that addresses all types of discrimination and harassment, and includes a paper for them to follow in order to submit their complaint. So this is really merely just updating our policies, and in particular, items 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 to reflect the new federal requirements that came down. I reviewed them. They're attached for your review as well, but they're pretty reflective, pretty straightforward of the new federal Title IX regulations. And,
which policy is 8? Because we can't see it. We can only see 4, 5, 6, and 7 on the screen.
I apologize. Number 8
That's
is
okay.
dating violence.
Okay.
And basically, it falls under the same guidelines. The only thing I included here, Ms. Lowry, is that they can go to their principal to report if there's anything going on. And then under that process, there would have to be an investigation conducted and once we're made aware of it. But so number 8 is also very similar and is reflective of all the Title IX changes that happen across the country when the feds changed the requirements.
So I know I have a couple of comments and honestly some concerns. I think for our dating violence and for our Title IX, I think we need to broaden who those individuals can report to. I think by saying it can only be the principal, it really limits. I think it should be, any trusted district employee that person feels comfortable going to. As far as dating violence in Title IX, everybody is a mandated reporter anyway, was my understanding. So while there may be a method for dealing with that complaint, I think we're going to possibly eliminate people because they may not feel comfortable reporting to the person that we identify. So if we can broaden that net to, we are providing training to a bunch of people. And the dating violence one, I have, my other concern is, I think in that training part, you're saying we're providing training to guidance counselors, nurses, and mental health staff at the high school. There's no mention of principals. So I think we need to add that in. I think we should open it up to any teacher who wants the training, provided that that's not going to be cost prohibitive. And I also think we need to start that training and that reporting much earlier than the high school. Dating violence doesn't just happen for 9th to 12th graders. So I would encourage that we at a minimum include the junior high, if not our upper elementary schools.
I could definitely do that. And what we could do is also connect and dovetail it in with what our safe to say mechanism as well. That's another way for individuals to report claims. So yeah, we could definitely update them. Respectfully, what I could do, Ms. Lowry, if you're okay with it, tomorrow or next day, follow up with you, make the changes, get it out and get it ready for the second reading. If the board's okay with the first reading tonight, if not, I can always take it off. It's not time sensitive. I would ask if you address it tonight and I can make the changes prior to second reading, or we can wait. But yeah, I think your comments and your changes are they're fair, and we can definitely do that.
I also think we have a responsibility to allow people who witness things to be reporters, whether that's a fellow student or any staff member within our district, both for dating violence and for the sexual harassment towards staff or sexual harassment towards students.
Yeah, I agree. I think these are small changes, and prior to the next meeting, I may need to call and follow up with you, just review them one more time.
Yeah.
But prior to the next meeting, I can update them if you're comfortable tonight, as is. Sorry, my dog is chewing on a water bottle. I can make those changes and get them ready for second reading, but I think I think that they make sense, and I'm fine with them.
Anybody else have any other comments or questions on the dating violence or sexual harassment ones?
I do.
Yep.
So Uda, one of my comments, Uda just kind of said it better than I could about reporting scheme in the policies. So I agree with her on that. The other one was, the comment I had was this, let's see, it'd be the staff, I think it was under the staff policy and student policy. If you scroll up. Yeah, 103 and 104. In it lists the definition of dating. Did that come from the state or was that from us?
No, it was not from us. It came from PSBA. That's a good question, but yes, it came from PSBA directly. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, for me, the language in that leaves room for interpretation, and I'm not quite sure if I feel the policy should be a little tighter than leaving room for interpretation. I don't know if there's a way to do that or not.
Well, Barb, and as you just said that, I would venture to guess that if you asked students at the high school whether or not they were dating, the majority of students would probably tell you no, but what is happening probably would fit that definition from when I was in high school. So maybe it is more correct to not call it dating violence, but just to call it like relationship violence. I mean, even if you're friends with someone, that's a relationship, and that may be easier to try to communicate to our students, because dating right now has a very specific definition that, like I said, a lot of our students would say, no, that's not what they're doing.
I agree.
Uta, this is Walter. I'm wondering whether or not, following that line of thinking, whether or not maybe it shouldn't read dating and or relationship violence. Maybe that way we've got everything covered, keep the PSBA happy, but and cover the more traditional stuff, but also the open-ended part that you and Barb brought up.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Barb, what do you think?
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Say that?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. Yes, Tom?
Concerned that the language in the 252 it reads like it requires the person who is directly experiencing violence to report it, and that we should be able to take some kind of report from people who observe it or know about it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think
it specifically said
they've
been subject to dating violence. I think that sentence needs to cast a broader net.
Yeah. I'll work on some language if you want, Mike.
Yes, ma'am. And I think the other thing we can include in there is just a reminder about the safe to say mechanism, to Mr. Harley's point, that look, if you're seeing it, if you know someone's being attacked and you don't feel comfortable going to a teacher, principal, or counselor, we can also make if you're okay with it, Ms. Lowry, make mention of the safe to say item in there as well.
Yep.
Okay.
I think that's good on did we cover everything for the Title IX and the relationship dating violence? Any other concerns?
No, Ms. Lowry, if I could repeat real quick to make sure we're okay, what we're going to look at doing is adding multiple people who they can report to, more than just the principal, teacher, counselor, a trusted adult. We're going to include language about safe to say in there as well, so they can use that mechanism. We're going to look at the definition of dating violence, and then we're going to look at renaming the policy dating/relationship violence. Correct? Those are notes.
We were also going to let people who witnessed it report it, and we were going to look at opening it up to not just the high school and broadening who can be trained.
Yes.
I think if we limit it to only students in grades 9 through 12, we are sorely missing the boat.
Okay, I have those notes. We can do that.
All right, can we talk about hazing?
Yes, ma'am.
The definition that's in this policy, I did not have a chance to find the actual definition from the state of Pennsylvania. So I just want to make sure that we are using the state definition.
Yes.
And I didn't get a chance to do that.
Yeah, my understanding is they are citing the PA code when they used and made the updates to the hazing policy. I can double check,
Okay.
but I'm almost positive. Yes, ma'am.
And again, I think the same thing with, I think we need to broaden who they can report to. That it's not just building principal or designee. And I think when we talk about delegation of responsibility, I think we need to be sure to cover that district employees, volunteers are required to report. You don't have the option to turn a blind eye to this. And that failure to report means that you could be responsible. Anybody who causes, participates, condones, or fails to report can be subject to criminal prosecution. I also think when we talk about violations, I think we need to say notification to applicable law enforcement may be made. I think we need to be really clear that at some point that gets out of our hands and we're required to. And then in the sentence under students, the last sentence says, the fact of whether a student qualified for and received safe harbor under a criminal investigation shall be considered in assigning discipline. Can we reword that to, it can be considered in determining disciplinary action?
Yes, ma'am.
Assigning discipline sounds like we're giving you a grade.
Yep.
And I don't think that's what we mean.
Yes, ma'am.
I think the similar concerns, just that we need to broaden who people can report to and make sure people really understand what hazing is. It is not limited to any certain group. It could be an entire class of students. It could be all the freshmen in XYZ class are, subject to whatever. And so it's not just our athletic organizations or student organizations. It could be, it could happen in the classroom.
I agree. And what I'll do is I'll talk to Mr. McElhaney and Mr. Lazanik, and we can, at the academic and extracurricular committee, report on how we educate kids on these different policies as well, to make sure that the policy is meeting reality. And I have no doubt it is, but we'll be better prepared at the academic and extracurricular committee, if you're okay with that, Ms. Lowry, as well, as a good follow-up.
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good to me. Any other comments on hazing? All right, I think we're at bullying and cyberbullying.
Yes, ma'am.
My comments are similar to the other ones as far as who can report and kind of the process.
Okay.
I didn't know if anybody else had any other comments.
But Mike,
Yes, sir.
this is Walter. I've got a question. I'll admit I did not actually read this policy, but one of the one of the issues that has always seemed to be a bugaboo concerning the cyberbullying is whether or not it's happens during school hours or after school hours, even though the relationship between the person being bullied and the bully themselves is very strong to the school system. Has there been any change of thought, or how does that actually work in today's world?
No, that's a great question, Mr. President. And my understanding of the law is anytime there's a clear nexus of what they do outside of school and it can impact a child's behavior, attendance, and progress in school, it can be taken upon by disciplinary actions. And it requires a great deal of process and work because we have to demonstrate and show that nexus. But, those things can be taken care of. And I think when you see a heighten of it across the country is when social media became the uproar. And if you look at some of the behavior that happens on social media, if it could or does preclude a kid from coming to school or having issues, we can address it through that way. And we have to show some sort of nexus to the behavior and to what's happening in school. But there is some, I wouldn't say broad power because that's not appropriate, but there is some room where that can be applied and can be taken into consideration. For example, if you look at, where it says bullying or the school setting, it means school grounds, vehicles, bus, any activity sponsored, because some people may argue field trip's different. That's school property. But, the big thing that our teachers do a nice job of noticing, and it's overdue our principals, is monitoring social media behavior. If that does interfere with the child's right to education, there are some, in fact, responsibilities that we can look at and should look at as well, sir.
I'm glad to hear that. Thanks, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Mike, I'm sorry. Back to the Title IX sexual harassment ones. Can we clean up the language so that we're consistent? In some sections of the policy, we refer to people as victims, and in other parts of the policy, we refer to people as survivors. And if we can just use the word survivors, I think that would be a positive change.
I could do that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that note until I looked again.
I can get them done this week, and then we'll be ready for, if you do first reading tonight, I'll have far in advance ready for second reading, Ms. Lowry, if you're okay with it.
Okay. Yep. Okay, I think we did dating violence. Can we go down to 9?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, Ms. Lowry, this is one, I don't know if the board wants to revisit or not. This is one we tried bringing up in the past, and I lost track of it, and I apologize. Last year, a year and a half ago, PSBA came out with the conduct of individual board members. What it does is really create a structure and clarity surrounding the board's authorities and actions and behaviors. It's a newer policy. I would recommend you look at adopting it. You don't necessarily have to do it tonight. We can look at it and do first reading, or, this is one that you could require some work to personalize it for you. But what it does, in my opinion, in regards of the final structure, it does give structure to behavior. So when you talk about onboarding board members, when you talk about what's acceptable norms and what's not, this does a nice job of kind of spelling it out. It's a little long-winded. I'm not going to lie to you. It has room for clarity, and we can have room to fix it. But, I know this is something that we valued looking at before, and I dropped the ball on that, and I'm just bringing it back up. So if you want to look at it tonight, we can. If not, we can give you some time and skip the first reading. But I think they do a nice job of really getting, some structure and some clarity around the do's and don'ts for board members.
I agree. I read it and have some comments, but if we're not ready to do first reading, then we can wait on those, or I can share my thoughts now, whatever you guys prefer.
I would, if it's okay with you, Ms. Lowry, I'd respectfully request that maybe we pull this one for first reading. Let the entire board look at it, because no offense, the whole board has to be comfortable with it. You guys have to own it. It's your rules, not mine. And I think that gives the board ample time to give input, if you're okay with that.
I think that's good.
And just remind me to pull it off the agenda when it comes time. I can make sure the first reading's off.
Mike.
Yes, sir.
Mike, this is Walter.
Yes, sir.
I think, because this was such a hot topic at a number of different scenarios and over time, I'm wondering whether or not we shouldn't have at a full board meeting or at this committee maybe next month a little more of a formal presentation of kind of paring down that long-winded to more of a 5 or 10 minute overview of the specifics, so that the board and the public get a little better sense as to what's actually in the policy. It might help us moving forward with any issues that might come up.
Yeah, I'm definitely fine.
Walter, I think that's a good idea. I think the other part is I think every board member needs to read it. And if they've got concerns and they can't be at the meeting, they need to send an email to Mike and me, and we can make sure that those are raised at the meeting. I think we need to have this conversation, and I think it's really important.
I certainly agree, Uta, with that, but I think that a little bit of a neutral presentation of some of this information, I think, would be helpful for the general public, and help set the tone for what the board members might be discussing.
Yeah, Mr. President, Ms. Lowry, they both make sense. And I think what I'll do is, if you're okay with it, Ms. Lowry, tomorrow, make sure, Anise, I think it's in the board section of the website, but I'll make sure we get another copy emailed out and take any feedback, if that's okay with you, Ms. Lowry.
I think that's a great idea. And I think we need to get feedback by like Monday at the latest, so that it's not hanging out there for the next month and then we get to right before the meeting and people haven't had a chance to read it.
Yes, ma'am. I agree. Yes, ma'am. Okay, if you're okay, can I move on to
Thank you.
number 10? Would you be offended if I moved on to number 10? So we met with some of the nurses.
No, keep going.
Okay, met with some of the nurses, conducted them about their use of medication policy, and they made some changes to clarify and reiterate that medication, if possible, should be given home, and if not, only a licensed nurse, as according to the law, can administer the medication during the school day. Also, we only want to make sure we're administering FDA-approved medication, and that locking refrigerators are excluded because our office doors are continuously 24/7 locked when the nurses are not in there. It also includes what we put as an AR that gives written permission for the families to sign off that we're allowed to administer the medication. A couple of years ago, there's some clarity provided by the state that only school nurses can administer the medication, and we want to just make sure now that the next piece is we have written permission. And if you say, well, why do you want them to take it home if they can? We don't. Ideally, I'd hate to see a kid lose their medication on a bus, someone else pick it up and take it accidentally, or someone else misplaces it. So it's really about, can we tighten things up a little bit? But then when we need to, we'll definitely administer it, and the nurses do a great job doing it. I think the changes and recommendations are fair and reasonable. And I think it's, it just really tightens it up a little bit with the written notification form that we should be doing anyways. Now, the only annoying part of it, Ms. Lowry, we're going to require it each year because we don't know if the medications change, the doses change, or whatnot. So every year, then we'll make sure we get parent permission at the start of the year for nurses to administer the medication.
I thought we already did that.
It's in our school.
Maybe,
a lot of people don't follow through with it as much as they should, Ms. Lowry, meaning making sure all the
I think the only thing I can think where there should be an exception is if a student has an EpiPen, it may be more helpful for them to be the ones that carry that than for it to be in the nurse's office, because seconds are precious in that situation. And I would hate for someone to have to run to the nurse's office, find the nurse's office locked because for whatever reason, and then we lose some time.
I agree, and I'll have to check out the policy regarding EpiPens. I know we have one. I think they may already be allowed, but let me research that and get back to you tomorrow, Ms. Lowry.
Yeah, we may just need to reference that in this policy.
Yep. Yes, ma'am. I could do that tomorrow if that's okay.
Mike.
Sounds great.
Yes, sir.
Mike and Uta, okay, so I've got a question on your annual certification. What happens if a student is on a particular prescription drug, but it's only temporary because they just had surgery or what have you, and maybe it happens after the first of the year? Is there some provisions in there to periodically in other words, instead of doing it on an annual basis, is there some language in there that says, or as required for temporary illnesses or something along those lines?
No, that's a great question, Mr. President. And what our nurses do in that case, they would just simply administer the form at that point in time. So if someone is on a temporary basis, that wouldn't preclude a kid from getting his medication. We would just simply contact the parent, work with the parent, and then send the slip home so we have some sort of awareness, because no one's really allowed to keep their medication on them. They bring it to school and give it over to the nurse, so the nurse would follow up at that point in time, sir, if that answers your question.
Yes, sir, that does. But I also had kind of a pet peeve that came up probably in the first 4 or 5 years that I was on the board. And that was that, strictly speaking, if I had a cough drop, and if it said medicated cough drop, that had to be administered by the school nurse, which to me sounded kind of crazy, particularly if it's an over-the-counter type of situation. Is that still the policy, or is there anything that we can, if it is there anything we can do to put a little common sense to that?
Walter, the definition of medication says all FDA medicines prescribed by a licensed prescriber. So it would not apply to over-the-counter medications according to the definition.
And would that then include the kid taking some aspirin or an ibuprofen or something like that that's over-the-counter strength?
I'm sorry. When I go on to read it, it says and any over-the-counter medicines. So let me read the definition again. Medications shall include all FDA medicines prescribed by licensed prescriber and any over-the-counter medicines. So it also would include aspirin and your medicated cough drop. I didn't read the whole definition when I read the first.
And I think, Mr. President, you bring up a good point, but our nurses use common sense and logic and work with their families and make sure. Technically, you're right when you cite the law, but I know they work with the families the best they can with regards to cough drops and things along that line. And I think, they do a good job at, applying common sense where needed, sir.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I just needed to bring it up because it always seemed to me kind of, I can't use the word here, but that technically we could hang a student for doing something like that.
Yes, sir. You're right. Yes, sir. Ms. Lowry, are you comfortable? I move on to number 11 and 12 and 13?
I am.
So 11, 12, and 13, Ms. Lowry, they're recommended for legal liability purposes. But really what you'll see in all the plans and all the policies, there's some minor terminology changes that were made to consistently use the term positive behavior support plan. It also includes language directing staff to share copies of a student's special education and disciplinary records when reporting incident to local law enforcement or the appropriate authorities. But also, in compliance with FERPA, this language has been part of the policy for years because it's an essential step in the process of reporting law enforcement. But really, the big part here is the use in the term of positive behavior support plan and the need for them. And Justin can go into that when talking about the discipline and looking at behavior supports for these kids. But Justin, you want to give an overview of what a positive behavior support plan is and the need for it and why we support this policy?
Yeah, so a positive behavior support plan is instituted anytime in a student's IEP that a student's behavior impacts themselves or it impacts other students in the classroom. And so typically a positive behavior support plan starts out with an FBA, which stands for a function-based assessment. And at that point, we start looking at the function of the behavior, whether it's to get or to get out of. And so that's a general overview of the positive behavior support plans. But in this policy, really, there's not a whole lot that changes within the policy outside of some of the Title IX requirements. Thanks, Mike.
So, Ms. Lowry, that addresses 11, 12, and 13 because you see 11 and 12, and you see 13 just being an updated language due to some compliance monitoring that the state made recommendations to policies, and those policies were drafted by PSBA for updating. Any questions regarding those policies as we're waiting for Ms. Larry to connect? And I apologize, I didn't want to rush through it, but any other questions for me?
No, I'm back.
Okay.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. And Ms. Lowry, if it's okay with you, I'll move on to number 14.
Yep.
So extracurricular activities. This was updates regarding notifying parents of concussion and traumatic brain injury information sheet, as well as informing them of the sudden cardiac arrest symptoms and warning signs. So we always did the concussion, and there was always some sudden cardiac arrest training going on to coaches. But now what we'll do starting in this winter, if the board's okay with it, we are going to actually provide them with information regarding sudden cardiac arrest symptoms and warning signs, and have the parents sign off on it that they received it and understood it. Now, that doesn't mean they can't ask any questions or can't follow up with the doctor or follow up with the team, but really we're updating it to make sure that the sudden cardiac arrest symptoms is being notified, that the families are being notified, made aware of those symptoms and warning signs. It's pretty straightforward. It came out of requirement that cites the Sudden Cardiac Arrest Prevention Act, and we are just trying to follow compliance with that to meet legal liability purposes.
So when I read this, it was very confusing because the title is extracurricular activities, but then we also talk about athletics, which is different from interscholastic athletics.
Yep.
So if we can call it athletics and extracurricular activities, and then some of the things that I think need to be in here aren't, like there's no mention of pay to participate. It says there's no cost. Well, that's not entirely true. And then I think we need to put something in there about students from our district schools, like the like St. Bernard's or Seeds of Faith, who may want to participate. There may be a cost for them to participate in our extracurriculars and or our athletics.
Yep, I can add that.
So, and then even under delegation of responsibility, it needs to say athletic/extracurricular activity. I think that, excuse me, I think that'll make it a little bit clearer. And then the code of conduct circumstances that are listed 1 through 6 under off-campus activities. If we're expecting students to be able to follow what this means, we need to reword this so it is much more clear. It reads like we're trying to include any possible scenario, but it's not very clear. If I was a student, I wouldn't know what the expectations were of me during off-campus activities. And so those same comments apply to the interscholastic activity one as well.
Yeah.
And then for athletics, they need a physical, and they need, they usually sign sports-specific guidelines. So that probably needs to be both in this and in the interscholastic athletic document.
Yep, I can definitely add those. Those are small changes. No worries.
Aren't you glad you asked?
Hey, feedback matters. We want it to work. So we'll these are small changes, though. It's not a big deal. We can get
No.
you know?
No.
And you're
Anybody else have other comments on athletics or extracurriculars or interscholastic athletics?
These 3 pages seem to be pretty general and not very specific. And just, I suspect I'd like to get this pulled and looked at in more detail.
By who and for what?
If it's going to be interscholastic athletics and extracurriculars, then it has to apply to drama.
Yep.
As it does to band and football.
Yep.
Right now, it's when I'm looking over it, it's not. I'm not sure what purpose it serves.
Well, I mean, the initial purpose is to make sure that we inform any participant, their family, in extracurriculars or athletics or interscholastic athletics about concussion, traumatic brain injury, and sudden cardiac arrest symptoms and prevention.
Is that all?
There are other things that there's other things that we've come up with that need to be changed in that wording wise. I mean, if you want to take a look at it in your committee, I think that's fine.
Yeah, I'm not really anxious to do that. But is this the only policy on interscholastic, Mike? Is there other sections that flesh this out better?
I think the ones that you take away from here, the big takeaway is 1, the sudden cardiac arrest, but also if you look at extracurricular and athletics one, I think what's important here, sir, is to remind people that, even though you're off campus and you're participating in an event, whether it's a sleepover, field trip, or a football game, that the code of conduct does apply. So I think Ms. Lowry's points of making it more easy to read resonates with me. But really what it says to me is you're a student at all time, your subject is, well, you're participating in extracurricular athletics subject to the code of conduct. I think that's the big takeaway for me, Mr. Hart, which is true, right? For example, if you go on a trip to Niagara Falls and there's something that happens inappropriately regarding alcohol, sneaking out, something of that sort, you would still be held subject to the code of conduct. And I think that's what it's referring to. I could pull it or we could approve it for the first reading, and then you and I can work. If you want to put it through yours for second reading, it's up to you, sir. It really doesn't matter to me.
But there isn't any place, there isn't another section that we should also be looking at for these activities?
No, I mean, I think if anything, as far as admin regulation, I would like to make sure and cross-reference our student handbook. I know Wade and I know, Mr. Lazanik, I know they've done a thorough job to make sure that the student code of conduct handbook that students receive at the beginning of the year mirrors that, because that's a responsibility. But I can't think of any other policy that may tie into this other than that, the code of conduct.
Yeah, and again, just in skimming through this, I don't see where we talk about eligibility, those kind of issues. Is that in the student handbook?
Yeah.
That interscholastic athletic policy does reference eligibility.
Where is that?
So it says under authority, it says the board directs that no student may participate in interscholastic athletics who have not met certain criteria, and there are 7 of them that we identified. And it also talks about the need for the off-campus activities to fall in line as well.
And it says the board adopts eligibility standards set by the Constitution of the Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association.
Yep. Yeah, right above it. Yep. And if you want, Ms. Lowry, you bring up a good point. The sentence above it, the board shall determine the standards of eligibility met by all students participating in interscholastic programs. Such standards shall require that each student, before participating in interscholastic activity, be covered by accident insurance, be free of injury, and undergo physical examination, which we do. So yes,
right,
we have that in there. Wade, do you want to talk about how you communicate the eligibility requirements? I know you do weekly checks, that I'm aware of, but you explain how you explain it to them, make them aware.
Yes, that is done at the beginning of the year whenever we do a review of the student handbook. And also, as you were mentioning, the weekly eligibility checks is another opportunity to remind or refresh that information. I just have a point or a question about the application of the code of conduct for off-campus activities. I know in the past that has been a very challenging topic or subject due to our limited ability to investigate things which happen off campus which are not necessarily school related. So if they are school related, certainly within our purview, but I'm looking for some specificity for those off-campus activities which may not necessarily be school activities when they occur.
So Wade, can you give me an example? Like if you're on a trip, overnight trip, and you're there to see maybe Gettysburg or you're in Niagara Falls, that's still a school trip. Are you saying you don't understand the clarity in surrounding that example?
No, what I mean is the term off campus certainly would include those things which are school related, but doesn't necessarily exclude the things which are not school related. So if you have an off campus activity, for instance, let's say you have a student athlete that goes to a an alcohol party and gets into trouble there, that we've had a lot of discussion and questions about whether or not that student who attends an alcohol party is subject to the extracurricular guidelines or discipline when the alcohol party is not a school-related activity, but yet it is an off-campus activity. Does that make sense?
Not necessarily. I don't see that distinction clearly. I mean, I would think not necessarily would be the answer to that. I'm not understanding the issue, but if you're going to Gettysburg and you're spending the night, and let's say, I think the example would be that supervisor in charge says, okay, you're free to do whatever you want for the next 3 hours. But when you come back to the room, you have to follow the rules. I don't think that works. I think once they're under our supervision, they're under our supervision, regardless of what they're doing.
I agree with that.
But they're not necessarily under your supervision if they've gone home from school or whatever, and they're back in mom and dad's jurisdiction at that point.
But
That's what I'm leaning toward. If it's an off-campus activity, which is school sponsored, like a trip to Gettysburg, then of course, then that child is under our responsibility, and any of those things apply. But an off-campus activity, as that is not defined as non-school related, is just that, an off-campus activity. I'm just trying to make sure that any off-campus activity which is not school related, then those activities don't fall under this guideline.
Wait, the way this is written right now, it reads to me that the kids have to follow this guideline 24/7, regardless of whether it's a school activity or not. There's no limitation on it. It says off-campus activity. So if they go home and go to Al Patty's bar and get in trouble, they're still under this policy. And I think you probably want to limit it to school activities.
Well, but Tom, I think for some of our students, I mean, I don't know if this is accurate, but at one point I was told that we are responsible for students from the time they leave school till they get home, whether they're on the school bus or whether they're walking home. And so if there's an altercation that happens on their way home from school, that becomes subject to our code of conduct and behavior and student handbook guidelines. And while I can see that connection, maybe, I am concerned that I'm not sure we want to take on monitoring student behavior when it is not a school event or related to a school event or activity.
I think that's, oh, I'm sorry.
Uta, I'm agreeing with you. I think we should limit what we're responsible for. And right now, the way this is written is that there's no limitation.
That's the clarification that I'm seeking.
Wade,
I would like.
great questions, Wade. Look, let's not overcomplicate this one. This applies if you're on a sporting trip, Wade, and the football team's out in Armstrong and something goes wrong, can they be subject to the code of conduct? They can. If they're a kegger in the woods, you're asking me, can we hold them accountable? I think that's an issue for that family, for that police, because I don't know if that's within our jurisdiction. Now they bring the alcohol to school, then go to the mountains, then we think we have another issue. I think we have to be careful not to pinpoint this into black and white area where sometimes it could be gray, but in this case, using Madam Vice President's example combined with Uta's, I think the policy is sufficient that they are on our time from the moment they leave their door till the moment they hit their door. They're also on our school time if they're at a football event or overnight trip, a band trip down to Florida, cheerleading trip, and subject to the code of conduct. If they're in a kegger in the mountain, that's a different story. And I think, we'll treat it as such, but I think the policy is sufficient in that it does protect us to include extracurriculars, because it's saying extracurricular activities, interscholastic activities. We're not just saying do whatever you want after school activities. So I think it's
right. So if they're going to an away basketball game and act inappropriately, they would be held to what our student handbook says.
Yeah, they're
Not to mention
subject.
the other school could tell them to leave.
Yeah, they're under and subject
Mm-hmm.
at that point.
So my question, Mike, is, and this has occurred a couple of different times for a couple of different teams, but there would be a team party at one of the players' house, and there would be some alcohol there that was inappropriate to be used there. The coaches weren't involved, it was just the players. So my question then is, if the example was given, if an individual went to some bar downtown and got in trouble, I get that. But if it's a group from the same team that's doing it, does that change the scenario?
I think there's a couple things going here. One, do you want that person representing us in an interscholastic activity? So, for example, you may not want to take school action as far as suspension, expulsion, things along that line, but I would argue then nothing would preclude you from the coach taking some action, maybe saying, look, I don't know if you are living or holding up to the expectations, because sports are a privilege, right? It's an opportunity, and they could take action as the coach themselves, or, honestly, that could be a SAP referral possibly as well. But, I wouldn't get too much in the weeds as far as some of these off-campus things. I think if it's a revolving school event, a school property, or some school function, then we're well within our mean. But we have to look what that nexus is between that event and what's happening, because I don't know how much we can regulate, how much we can't. We have to be careful, as that's a slippery slope. Go ahead, Basutta.
I was going to say, you know what? If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So if it's, I'm going to pick on somebody. If it's the magical singers that all have a party, and the supervisor, the sponsor, the advisor is not invited, and Mr. McElhaney is not invited, but everybody else who's there is either affiliated with the group or friends with somebody in the group, well, guess what? It's a magical singers event. So they may not like that, but they're representing the school and they're representing that group and whatever it is that they do. And, that's part of the obligation of being a member of an organization or a group that's bigger than yourself. And it's a hard concept, but, I don't think we go looking for those situations, but when those situations arise and are brought to our attention, I don't think we have a choice but to respond.
Yeah, and I think Ms. Lauer brings up a good point. It would not be done in isolation. It'd be done in conference with me and our school solicitor, as well as the local authorities if something went wrong. So why don't we just agree to this? We'll take it by a case-by-case basis, seek some clarity from the school solicitor. That way Wade's questions are addressed, and then we can move forward with the first reading tonight. Is that okay, Ms. Lauer?
I'm having all kinds of technical issues. Yes, that's fine with me. Anybody else have any comments, questions, concerns? All right.
I only have two more things real quick, Ms. Lowry. Is one, the sudden cardiac arrest policy that we have to adopt as a Sudden Cardiac Arrest Prevention Act was put into law. It's recommended for legal liability purposes. And then the last thing I have, Ms. Lowry, is we're required by law to give annual policy notifications to families, students, community. And if you just click on the link, that's what it looks like. And I'd like to send it out later this week to make families aware of these various policies. It's also included on our website, Code of Conduct. This is just our annual notification that we're required to do by law.
Yep, makes sense. And I'm glad we're doing it earlier than waiting till the last day.
And that's all I have, Ms. Lowry.
Great. Anything else that we didn't cover, or things y'all thought of that pertain to the items on the agenda or the non-agenda item? All right. Well, it is 6:30.
Uta,
Yeah.
no, you just want to be certain to say it one more time, that if there are any comments or changes for any of these policies, could the board members please get them in by, what did you say, Monday?
Yeah,
So
Monday at the latest.
Yeah, so it's not later in the week.
Yeah, well, and if it's Monday at the latest, it's Monday's a school board day. It might be easier for people to remember. I just don't want to wait until any later so that we have time to address those concerns and make changes, and then we're ready for a second reading at the next board meeting. Thank you, Cinda.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. All right. Thanks, y'all. I think we are adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.